Hey there everybody, and welcome to my summoner guide for Tainted Grail. I'm Icon, and this video will guide you through the basics of this character class. I will talk about its playstyle, strengths and weaknesses, and how to build the class and have fun with it. So at the beginning of the summoner's career, you get to choose which kind of starting minion you want to have. You can choose between a golem, an abomination, and a worm. The golem is the tanking unit, which will divert all the damage away from you onto itself and reflecting a portion of that. The abomination is your minion, which deals AoE damage, and the worm is your minion, which deals single target damage. Between all those sits the Fae, but we're going to talk about the Fae in a combat situation. The summoner himself has the feature that he can upgrade his minions without any limits, but all his minions will never ever act on their own. Unlike other summoner classes, this is a really major difference, but I'll say this is explained best in combat, so let's get out of there and fight one or two fights, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening there before we get back into the village and talk about itemization, specialization choices. So, the first fight goes down like this. I chose the golem as a minion, as my starting minion, and I personally would recommend that to everybody who's just starting fresh out with this class, because it's a really cool unit which just will redirect all the damage on itself and retaliate for 50% of that. Pretty cool, because that means this attack will just be tanked by this little dude. But one thing is to be mentioned: you will always suffer a small fraction of the damage yourself, depending on the level of the minion. So to make sure that you really take no damage, always have a barrier on yourself. That's really important for the summoner, because otherwise a portion of that damage will flow over to you. It will not do that though if the golem itself has a barrier. But enough of that. So, to actually deal damage, the summoner always has to activate his minions. Activation is one action you always get for free in every turn for 0 energy. So, every minion must be activated manually. Every minion does, of course, something else when activated. The golem will heal himself for this amount, and the abomination will do an AoE attack, and the worm will do a double single target attack. It's also worth mentioning that the worm will reduce the enemy's armor and make them vulnerable after 6 attacks. Vulnerable means 100% more damage from, I think, all sources. So this is your ideal single target minion. So let's activate that dude and see what happens. We do 2 damage with 2 attacks with 5 to 8 damage, and we also gained a charge on our ultimate ability. The summoner's ultimate ability is just a promotion for minions. The more charges, the more levels. This also means activate your minions at all times. Even if you just send a full HP golem to heal himself. Doesn't matter, it generates charges, and charges are really important for you. So let's skip through here, and as you see here, the attack goes onto the golem, but 1 point of damage went into our barrier. So that's because the minion was level 1. The higher the level, the more damage spreads over to you. We just pulled up a Fae, which is really good, because I wanted to talk about the Fae as well. The Fae is kind of a utility and debuff minion, which is kind of unique for the most unique one, because I think I'm going to talk about this more than about the others. The Fae has a passive which decreases the damage of all enemies by 10%, which means having a Fae on the table is always a good idea, because it will debuff your enemies substantially. Also, when you activate the Fae, you will gain ultimate charges equal to its level. That means with activations of the Fae, you gain not only 1 activation point, but 2. So the Fae is also a very good dump minion to drop activations in that you don't need at the end of the turn. But don't you worry, this doesn't happen too often. My basic strategy for fights as a summoner, if it's nothing too special, is I select 1 minion to deal damage with, promote him as much as possible, and always try to keep up 1 golem available. So now we just activate that thing as much as possible, get into the next turn. As you see here, barriers get barriers don't get removed at the end of the turn, so we can't just stay with that. Also unique to this class are sigils. Sigils are enchantments which will be put onto the minion and stay there until the minion dies or gets sacrificed. Then the sigil gets back into your deck. So we're going to power up this one, give him more power. Let's promote that duty. And, well, do we have already enough charges? No, sadly not. Okay, we're going to blast away the enemy then. And this is the basic code of conduct for the summoner class. You try to have always some golem on the table to redirect the damage upon, and then you build up your own army to counteract that. When you're about selecting cards, there are two really important mechanics for the summoner to begin with, or, well, two really important things in general. That's, for one, acquire as many stuns as possible. Well, okay, that's maybe not entirely true, but your deck should have a healthy amount of stuns, because being unable to stun enemies will cost you the game sooner or later. Just believe me when I put it that drastically. Also, let's see if we can get something via a reroll. Well, okay. The other mechanic is that the summoner can do sacrifices. Sacrificing minions is a key component of all summoning classes, and it's really, really powerful. Among the perks, I really just have to say, pick whatever feels really good for you. There are only, well, there are not really any mandatory traits among the summoner where I would say this is one of those traits that you should always get if you can. I personally like traits that have a permanent effect over traits that have just a one-time effect, just like your surprise attacks has only a one-time effect. I personally would prefer something like redirected flow, but this is also a question of taste and playstyle. When it comes down to runes, we will talk about that when we get back into the village. So let's go into one more fight, which includes a little bit more enemies, because that was not really representative. With the summoner, there's one big and major weakness. Yeah, let's go for the Treasure Guardian fight. That's a good one. And that's AoE. Every AoE attacker which goes against you is a huge problem for you, because AoE attacks work like that. Let's just assume that the Abomination, that this guy would deal AoE, would do an AoE attack. Then this would mean an AoE attack would be 8 to 10 damage to him, 8 to 8 damage to him, 8 to 10 damage to him, and that means the golem would need to tank 3 blows instead of 1 blow. So every AoE damage dealer will totally rip your golems apart. The good news, the golem has a retaliation effect, so that means he blasts the AoE damage dealer as well. But the bad news about that, you will have big problems when there are too many AoE damage dealers to hide behind your minions. So, when it comes down to group fights, I almost all the time spam the Abomination. Generally said, I consider the Abomination as one of the most powerful units the summoner has in his arsenal. The Worm is, for me, more a situational unit. Whenever it's really just one enemy to be taken down, the Worm can really shine. It's a good boss minion. I personally like to use the Worm for bosses and the Abomination for these floor fights. Also, what I really like to do is to have the double golem. You can have a maximum amount of 4 minions, so my personal standard setup is 2 golems, 1 damage dealer, and 1 Fae. This way, I have a backup, backup bolstering golem if something goes bad. The Fae is a really, really good recipient for sacrifice effects, because, you know, it's really good to have 1 minion where it doesn't really matter if you lose him or sacrifice him to whatever reasons. And also, having a Fae is really cool to activate it for more ultimate charges if it is ever a good thing. Here we go. So this is my staple setup. Overall, I think the Summoner is one of the most easy classes to play, actually. In my opinion, the other Summoner classes are a lot more demanding and punishing if you do mistakes, whereas the Summoner is only limited in his way that he has to keep up barriers to soak up the damage completely, but that's actually not even that problematic. And you always have to take care about things like AoE damage dealers. That's the real big weakness I would put down on the Summoner. Apart from that, it's a very easy tanking and spanking class. As long as you have your golems on the table there, you are nigh invulnerable. And most fights in the game will be really, really easy. The Summoner struggles whenever there's too much damage in too short amount of time. So I personally made the experience whenever the enemies are relying very highly on burst damage, I suffered the most. Oh yeah, now we can do a full ultimate here. There we go. So to counteract these problematics, I found personally the best way is to try to have as many stuns as possible, because stuns are your best friend to keep the enemy disabled while you try to whittle him down. So the Soul Harvester here really slows us down by a lot. Sadly, you can't assign the worm to a specific target. The worm will always attack random targets, so therefore I really can't say he's a good candidate for this fight, even though it looks like he would. Okay, so where the heck does he have so much armor here? Okay. So, let's get back to the village and talk about specializations, because I feel like I have already explained all there was to combat around here. And this is, by the way, one of the most mean combats you can encounter as a summoner, because single target damage is pretty hard, because your worm would attack these souls also, and well, let's see you in the village for some equipment discussion. Now, let's talk about the underlying mechanics of the Summoner's gameplay. You as a character might be not dealing damage on your own, but your minions' damage is basing on your own damage. If I remember correctly, they also inherit a portion of your armor rating, so your own stats are really, really important when you want to go for a good workout with your minions. That's why I personally really like cards which either increase your damage per action in this turn, or there's also the Gar rune, which directly increases your damage by a flat amount. This really empowers your minions by a lot, and I can't recommend it enough. As a starting out character, really, really a good thing. Avoid runes which only do effects during the beginning of a fight, because as the summoner you are not a burst class, you are building up, you're a power ramp build, so pick up things that help you with that. Of course, things like Thel are pretty good for the armor slot too, because like I said, armor is valuable as well. I personally like the HP heal after combats too, but I think to my personal pleasure, there are better runes in the armor slot. The most armor slot runes aren't that interesting for the summoner. I do value a lot every rune, every type of rune which does either increase my cards on the hand, because it's really important that you get your summons back, or cards that reduce the costs in some way. These are the next two really interesting things. So to summarize it, you want on your runes damage, more cards, cost reductions. You would want to avoid runes that only give you a bonus during the beginning of a fight, because as a summoner, you're not really relying so much on your first turn to determine fights. You want to build up yourself and hide behind your minions. So this, and the fact that you are that flexible, means also that there's not too much more that you should focus on so drastically, because you can go whatever you want to, because you're a pretty tanky build in general. At the Seamstress, if you have unlocked her, you can upgrade your stats like that. I would personally recommend to upgrade your damage, like I said. Max HP aren't that important, because you can hide behind your minions most of the time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I want to talk about activatables here for a moment as well, at the Scientist's place. Activatable items which are really interesting for your class. Draw a card can be really good, because there's one scenario which is really bad for yourself, and that's when you run out of minions and get attacked hard. So you really want to have effects that either stun your enemies or give you new cards to counteract that. Also pretty decently work effects that reduce the enemy's damage for the case that you get hit, because they are health potions for a reason. Okay, so I hope that helped you out somewhat in conquering the Summoner class. I personally would recommend the Summoner as a class to everybody who's new to the Minion Master classes. The Blood Mage and the Necromancer are a little bit more quirky compared to the Summoner, but if you don't like the Summoner's passive playstyle, I would recommend as a next one the Necromancer. So feel free to drop me a comment down below if you have any further questions. Feel free to ask away. I only scraped the tip of the iceberg here. The more you play, the more cards you unlock, of course. I didn't really mention that, but if you don't know how to progress, just play it more and unlock more cards and perks. It always helps. And of course, leave a thumbs up on that video if you liked it. Check also my channel out. There's tons of content there. I do daily videos, so if you like my type of videos, just turn on those notifications and subscribe, and you won't miss anything in the future. Also in the description below, you will find my Twitch channel where I do daily streams, so I'd be more than happy if you would come by and hang out a bit. Also, check out the links for financial support, because I do free videos for you guys, and if you would like to tip or financially support this channel, I'd be more than happy. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching. That's the biggest support you can do for me. Have a good day and see you soon. Bye bye.